Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Winchester City Council Carbon Neutrality Open Forum. I'm Councillor Kelsey Lerney. I am the Cabinet Member for Climate Emergency at Winchester City Council and Chair of this forum. This meeting is being held virtually and in accordance with the Council's rules for virtual meetings. Attendees are reminded that although this meeting is being held remotely, they're regarded as being present in a meeting of the Council and they should observe rules of behaviour. Right, I'm so sorry, that's exactly the kind of thing that Right, I apologise everybody, this is the trouble with doing things from Right, after that brief intermission, if everybody could turn their phones off, then that would be welcome. I have turned my mobile off, but unfortunately I can't turn the house phone off. Can I ask everybody present in this meeting that your microphones remain muted and you turn your cameras off? This will reduce background noise and any unintentional disturbances, such as the one we've just had. We will be asking you to use either your mobile phones or another electronic device to access a Slido poll. However, can you please make sure that it is turned down or on silent? This meeting is being recorded and it will be available on our website following the meeting. We have asked for questions to be submitted in advance and we will ask those questions first. You can, however, enter questions in the chat at any time during the meeting and we'll try and deal with those at the end. If we don't have time to answer tonight, we will try and send an answer via email after the meeting. I'm pleased to see such a good attendance this evening. And we'll start with our first Slido. The first Slido asks, what worries you most about the current energy crisis? So Slido is a tool we use which allows people to answer interactive polls during meetings, which we found very successful. If you either point your phone at the screen and scan the QR code, or using a browser, enter slido.com and the number that's contained underneath on the screen, then that'll take you into the Slido question. So we'll just give another minute on that. I'm pleased to see so many of you taking part. Right, thank you very much everybody who's contributed to that. As we can see, the big concern about the current energy crisis is about how our most vulnerable residents are going to cope with the increase in energy prices, but also there's a good deal of concern about potentially the government rolling back on the move to renewable energies, an increase in the amount of fossil fuels used, and an increased reliance on fossil fuels. So thank you very much for that. Right, so we'll now move on to our second Slido question. So, do you purchase renewable energy? Right, well, we've got a good number of answers to that. So, in fact, I don't quite understand how the percentages have worked there, but it looks like virtually everybody uses renewable electricity, but the number using renewable gas is much smaller. And I'm not surprised, as it's quite difficult to get hold of a good renewable gas supplier. But that's useful information. Councillor McLean, if you've got a question, would you put it in the chat, please? It would be helpful if everybody can turn their cameras off. Right, so thank you to everybody who took part in that. We'll now move on to the first part of our agenda. We were going to have a presentation from the National Energy Foundation. Unfortunately, the National Energy Foundation's speaker was unable to attend, but we do have the presentation that she was going to give. So I'll pass over to Anna Wise, who will give the presentation in her stead. Right, Anna.
Thank you. So the National Energy Foundation has a service called Warmth and Wellbeing, which is to help the most vulnerable, I think, in the society, people coming out of hospital, and so on, basically with energy and all they need to settle into home. So the presentation I sent just covers the causes of fuel poverty, effects of living in fuel poverty, and how to identify those sort of vulnerable groups. So firstly, what is fuel poverty? The National Energy Foundation use a definition that has a residual income below the poverty line after accounting for your fuel costs and lives in a home that has a lower energy efficiency rating than C, so sort of those low energy, you know, poor building fabric that mean you're spending a lot heating your home even before current rises. They define the causes of fuel poverty, obviously, as energy costs, which we've seen rise a lot, household income, and then the energy efficiency of the building or flat that you're living in. And those three factors together sort of combine, particularly at this time, to push people into fuel poverty. And they estimate that there's 2.5 million households in fuel poverty in England, and that was a 2018 stat from Bayes. So we can only estimate that's possibly getting worse at the moment. So the effects of living in fuel poverty are on your physical health, particularly people who've got pre-existing conditions, respiratory conditions, cardiovascular. The effect on your mental health, the stress of anxiety and depression that can be associated with living with high bills and in cold living conditions. And then there's also the damage to property. Cold properties are more likely to develop condensation and mold. And now obviously that in turn impacts on health and the way you live and so on. So they've, National Energy Foundation has identified 6 vulnerable groups. So unemployed, those in receipt of benefits on a low income, people living with disabilities, with health conditions, and also retired or over 65. Typically, this group of people spends longer at home, so they have to spend more on heating. And if they have medical conditions, it can really make people feel more affected by the cold. So how to identify this group? They've put together a few pointers which they, I think, use, and that people in the wider system, you know, can help to identify. So, for example, you might be wearing lots of layers inside. You might develop, you know, persistent cough or cold or those health conditions associated. Broken heating system and not being able to afford to fix it, or only heating one room in the house, and that knock-on effect of not being keen to have visitors, perhaps because you're embarrassed or it's just uncomfortable, and signs or smell of damp in the house. So what help is available? We've got 3 experts on retrofit, both talking about us as a council and also warmer homes and super homes later up. So hopefully some of these questions will be answered for you. But there's the energy company obligation funding, eco-funding, but it's currently on hold, I gather, due to sort of oversubscription, and that's mainly for owner occupiers. There's the Green Homes Grant, or the LAD funding, which is aimed at lower energy performance buildings and low income households, which covers insulation and renewable heating. And then there's the Warm Home Discount, which is £150 towards winter usage. That's available to those in receipt of means tested benefits, but they might have to meet other criteria. And then there's help from energy trust funds or from the energy providers who do have some emergency funds which you can apply for to help if you get into debt. But clients will usually need to seek debt advice before applying. So that was their presentation. Thanks for listening. I'll hand back to Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. For anybody who's come in late, the presenter for the National Energy Foundation unfortunately couldn't be with us, so one of our officers, Anna Wise, has given the presentation that they would have given. So I'm afraid we probably can't answer any questions delving into that too deeply. We'll follow that with a presentation from Dr. Charlotte Johnson, who's the Head of Research at the Centre of Sustainable Energy, who's giving a presentation on smart and fair, achieving a socially inclusive transition to net zero. So welcome, Charlotte. Are you ready to turn your camera on and share your screen?
I am. Yep. Hello. Thanks for having me. I'll share my screen now. I'll turn my camera off just while I'm presenting, just to save on that. Is that working for everybody?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Charlotte.
Great. Okay, well, thanks for having me. Yes, so I am Charlotte, working at the Centre for Sustainable Energy in their research team. So the Centre for Sustainable Energy, for those that don't know, is a charity based in Bristol that works to support people to take action on the climate emergency and the misery of cold homes. There's a couple of teams at CSE. So we have the local and community empowerment team who's recently worked with Winchester on their carbon neutrality program. And then we've also got a team who do of home energy advisors who do some of that frontline work, talking to households, helping them understand what they can do to manage their energy costs. And I'm from the research team, so we work with a number of actors in the energy sector and the energy industry to really bring some of those concerns into the way they think about energy transitions. And the program of work that I'm here to present is called Smart and Fair, and this is really looking to explore the way that the transition to net zero can be fair and can be equitable. So I was going to present our research on that, but I wanted to start off with a slightly positive graph there, just showing how the energy system is changing and has changed. So these are the latest stats available from BEIS, and I just wanted to show the overview of how electricity generation in the UK has changed in the last 20 years. So we can see that there's been a decline in fossil fuels, so the big blue section is declining, and that increase in renewables is coming from the bottom, as well as an overall decline in the amount of electricity being generated. So that's great news, and what that means is really a change to the energy system more broadly. So what we're seeing is much more variable and also local supply. So as we move away from big thermal power plants in remote areas and start to use more renewables, we're obviously dealing with a more variable supply of electricity, but some of that is also being produced much more locally. And then that puts an obligation for us to be much more aware of how we're using the energy. So there's a lot more focus on managing our demand and making sure that the amount of energy and when we use it is more in line with the availability of particularly renewable electricity. And so what we're seeing that feed into is this digitalization of the energy system in order to really improve our capacity to optimize the amount of energy we have available and make sure we're using it. And what that means is we're actually seeing changes in our homes, and we need to start thinking about the way that we do things in our homes. And we're seeing a proliferation of products and services that are designed to help us do that. So I put a few examples here, everything from a smart immersion tank that's able to use available solar PV. If you've got solar PV on your roof, that can take some of that electricity in order to heat your water and optimize that with perhaps gas supply of your own gas, and you can manage it remotely by your phone. You've also got things like smart thermostats that are designed to learn consumer behavior in their home and optimize the heating there. And of course, there's a proliferation of products and services around electric vehicles, from the way that we charge the vehicles on the street, but also in supplying electricity from a car battery at times of need. So when the grid needs more energy, it can call on electric vehicles that are parked and are signed up to a vehicle to grid scheme, right down to very simple smart plug. So the idea of using a timer plug is an old one and a good one, but now we're seeing a proliferation of technologies that are designed by particular tech firms to enable you to remotely manage your electricity devices in the home. And really our programme, Smart and Fair, is questioning the extent to which this proliferation of products and services is inclusive enough and is going to be able to deliver the kind of transition that we need to see. So we recognise that as the energy system needs to become much smarter and much more flexible in order to cut emissions and reach net zero, but we just want to raise the concern about the potential increase in inequalities that some of this transition or some of these changes could create, particularly when we think through some of the distribution of system costs and benefits. And so by that I mean questions of who has to pay and who gets the benefit, really. If we take the example of the feed-in tariff, which was funded by all electricity bill payers, but only a proportion of electricity bill payers were able to make use of that tariff and see the benefits in terms of being able to invest in solar PV or some renewable technology that was able to earn a feed-in tariff. But everyone was contributing to the pot of money that provided that subsidy. And we were also concerned around the way that some of these quite complex products and services might just increase the barriers to entry and leave people behind in terms of their ability to participate in order to access the cheapest and the greenest energy available. But we're also tapping into broader concerns in the industry that recognise that smart without creating a smart system that isn't fair is not socially acceptable or politically sustainable. And we're working with those actors in the sector who want to see to make sure that no consumer is left behind as the UK's energy system transitions. I just wanted to talk through the way that we're thinking about this. So what our piece of research is really thinking about, what does it take for an individual household or an individual person to access the kinds of products and services that we're seeing appearing on the market. And we've developed what we call this capability lens, which really thinks much more broadly in order to understand what's required to access and to benefit from a particular product and service. Because we're really moving away from the ability to be a passive consumer in the energy system. So our existing energy system is very much set up for an individual household to have an individual contract with an individual supplier who will supply them with energy. But what we're seeing is a kind of is the emergence of lots of intermediaries and lots of different products and services that make that relationship between an energy consumer and a supplier more complex. Some of the things that we think through with the types of technologies that people have in their homes and how they might, and the level of demand they have. We also are thinking about digital, people's ability to access digital services. So not just their the infrastructure that's involved, whether they have high-speed broadband, but also their confidence in being able to use these products and services. We also have, sorry, I was just interrupted by a child there. So we're also thinking through some of the social networks and how that affects people's ability to take up certain types of products and services. And then and finally, then we also are looking through the way that the local area affects someone's household's ability, because what we will see is a move away from this this kind of this notion of universal access and of standardized grid charges to much more disaggregated understandings of what's available in your local area. And then, of course, there's the financial aspects as well, about whether or not people own their own homes or rents, what kind of ability they have to invest in products that may reduce running costs but have high upfront costs. So all these factors we're sort of bringing together in our capability lens to really try and understand who's able to take advantage and who might get left behind. Alongside that, we're also running this program of market monitoring, which has been very interesting to sort of survey what kind of products and services and tariffs are out there. And we've just, we're in the middle of doing that. We've profiled about 100. So we're just doing types rather than every single individual tariff that's available in the market, but 31 different types of, say, import tariffs. So we're seeing the emergence of new types of variable tariffs that might be time of use. So you pay an on-peak or an off-peak, or you pay for a type of use. You might have a specific tariff for an EV charger. And so we've been mapping all these products and services and mapping them against the kind of capabilities that they require of households. And in parallel, we're also developing a smart energy choices tool. So this is a program that energy advisors can use to help consumers navigate the market. So they'll take people through a series of simple questions to help understand precisely some of those attributes, to think what they have in their home, what their lifestyle's like, what their different attitudes towards different aspects of energy products are, in order to navigate and find a set of products and services that might work for them and help them reduce running costs. And finally, we've got an analytical piece of work around really trying to map and understand the distribution of households who can take up different products and services. So here we've profiled Bristol because that's where we're based, but it's really looking what proportion of Bristol's population is able to easily access existing products and services that may be able to reduce their running costs, and what proportion might be able to access those kind of products and services if we tweaked some of the design requirements or rolled out a type of policy intervention that might, say, reduce capital costs. So those are the areas that we're working on in the Smart and Fair programme, and we've published our first report in which is available on our website, which you can look at the outcomes of our research, the options for interventions to increase participation in the smart energy future, as well as some recommendations to government and industry to support broader access and participation in the smart energy market. That is where I'll end the presentation. I think we're having questions at the end, so I will hand back now.
Yep. Thank you, Charlotte. If anybody has any questions for Dr. Johnson, then please, if you put them in the chat, and then we'll take them later on. So we'll now move on to our next segment on the agenda on retrofit, and we start with the council's own retrofit lead, Prashanta Burbridge, who's going to be talking about the retrofit of housing owned by Winchester City Council. So Prashanta, if you'd like to start presenting.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just share my presentation. Is that okay? Can you see that okay?
Yes, that's great. Thanks.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. My name is Prashanta Burbridge, and I am the Retrofit Coordinator and Energy Manager for Winchester City Council. I will be talking about Winchester City Council's retrofit journey, specifically how we deliver retrofit in our council with our housing stock, and what are the parameters that rule this delivery. What is retrofit? I think it's good to define what retrofit is in terms of reducing energy within existing buildings. So the Retrofit Academy defines it as retrofit is the renovation of a building with specific objective of reducing the heat demand and making it more energy efficient. This is usually achieved through improving the building fabric, which is essentially the first step, but can also include building services and renewables too. So I put 2 and 3 because basically the approach is to improve the fabric, make sure you're decreasing the energy escaping through your fabric, making sure that your fabric is in a good condition, and then investing in building services and renewables. It's a bit, I like to explain it as, it's a bit like trying to take a bungalow, a single-story bungalow, and convert it into a multi-story. Most people would say, will respond to that as in it wasn't designed to be a multi-story dwelling. And in the same way, trying to apply energy efficient measures to existing buildings, they were not necessarily designed for this. So it's about taking step by step and understanding the fabric and understanding the building before applying any energy improvement measures. What is my role? I'm the retrofit coordinator and housing stock energy manager. I will be looking at, and I have already started to develop a strategy for delivering Winchester City Council's net zero target. So our target is 2030, but we've got interim milestones before that. Oversee and project manage, as well as quality assure the various strands of retrofitting programs, assist in reducing existing energy consumption on cared for and communal or sheltered housing, heat network management. So this is basically just understanding our network and seeing where we can reduce energy usage, and then submit bids for the for government funding to aid our retrofit journey. I think it's also important to understand that these bidding they're competitive, so it is really about making sure that our applications are solid and that we're ready to really deliver on what we're saying we would. What are the numbers? What are the kind of numbers we're looking at? So Winchester City Council have just over 5,000 properties. Of those 5,000 properties, we have various types from bedsits, flats, hostels, maisonettes, bungalows, houses, and within the houses we have semi-detached, detached, terraces. And the reason I'm stipulating this is because really we need to understand that they're all different, and within those categories they're very different in terms of their orientation, where they're located within the city. Do they have a roof that's shaded for half the day with a tree? Before we apply and decide what energy measures we need to apply and how we retrofit our housing stock, it is essential that we understand them, because each property will require slight variations, and really the single measure, large scale rolling out of energy efficient measures has really been superseded. What are our energy ratings at the moment? At the moment, we've got slightly under 2,000 properties that are at EPC band D and below, and we've got just over 3,000 properties that are band C and above. We will be looking at bringing our D and below properties, our worst performing properties, up to a C by 2025. And then with the rest of it, 90-odd%, looking to achieve our net zero. And as Dr. Johnson was saying, it's almost net zero, because you reduce the energy within a property by 65 or 70%, and then you rely on the grid to decarbonize, and therefore you meet net zero. I understand, obviously, like new trends might not necessarily mean we achieve that in terms of the grid. Governing factors. What are the factors really that govern how we retrofit our properties and how we deliver them? Really at the heart of this is our tenants, ensuring that when we retrofit a property, our tenants are left with healthier buildings, better internal air quality, better condition of their building fabric, and obviously cheaper built, less use of energy. The governing legislation that rules this is past 2035. It was created in 2018 and has been updated in 2019. Past 2035 really ensures that the tenants as well as the client is safeguarded in this process, and it makes sure that there's this logical and strategic process. It was developed to detox the retrofitting industry from quick single measures, large contracts that we all know had detrimental effects in some instances. The other factors that contribute is funding and timing. How do we ensure we get sufficient funding in the right time to deliver within our targets? We have building regs and planning policies. It's important that when we retrofit that we take into account all the other building regs. Is ventilation correct? Can we make it a safer fire rated property? Can we ensure that asbestos is treated or removed at that point? Are there advantages in us being able to do a little bit more so that we can create a roadmap to meet net zero within those properties? And then we have the industry expertise and procurement. And here it is basically, we're in a young industry, trying to find the right experts to deliver timely is incredibly difficult, and it is one of the hindering factors that we are facing. And lastly, learning. It's important to know and for us to continue to learn. So wherever we will be retrofitting, we will be ensuring that we put in monitors and ensure that we evaluate that property. So when we pick up performance gaps or unintended consequences within those properties, we feed it back into the loop fairly quickly so that we can learn and we can obviously better our retrofit process. What is PAS 2035? I touched on it earlier, but it is really important to understand what it's asking us. Any public funded retrofit scheme needs to follow PAS 2035, which is essentially public available specification. And it basically determines that each professional within this framework delivers and abides by a retrofit code of conduct, a retrofit code of practice. There's a quality mark, so the governing body that ensures that we deliver according to PAS 2035 is called Trustmark. It's also a good platform if you're wanting to do retrofit where you can find accredited and trusted individuals in the industry. It also is a pool of advice, skills, and training. So it's very appreciative of the fact that it's a young industry and we're still learning. So whatever learning we take from our experiences, we feed back into a data warehouse, and this is available for everyone to tap into. And then ultimately the retrofit process, it sets out very clearly that before you start a retrofit, you need to assess the building, you need to understand it before you decide what energy improvement measures needs to be installed. Ensure that you have a good design where if you're looking at the fabric, your joints, your intersections, you're ensuring an airtight and well ventilated property, ensuring that the installation is done well and that your installers are accredited, and then commissioning and handover. Handover is very important because here we take our tenants with us. We all understand that with net zero and with where we're going, we have to alter the way we live and our expectations slightly. And it might be that the home works slightly differently, but people can only live comfortably within a home if they understand how it works. And then lastly, just the monitoring and evaluation that I spoke about, ensuring that we feed back into the process so that we learn and we deliver better every time. The beginning of our roadmap. So as I said earlier, that our Winchester net zero target is 2030, but we do have milestones along the way. Some of these programs have already begun, and I'm very excited to know that we are already at starting in earnest. So the voids on the far left, we're looking at retrofitting voids that come up that are EPC band D and below. So the poor performing properties will be looked at. They are individual houses because, as I said earlier, each property type requires a different type of energy measure. And the idea is that when these voids come up, we roadmap it. How does this property get to net zero? Of course, we'll be looking at fabric first, ensuring that the fabric is in good condition, ensuring that the insulation is where it should be, and bringing that property up to the grade that we need it to be. And then at that point, taking opportunities. So if that boiler is up for change, then that's a good time to change it. And as I say, we will continue to monitor, assess, and see how these properties perform. We also have started on how to treat properties. So non-traditional properties that are in conservation areas and heritage that are either listed or have any other heritage associated to it, they do require deep retrofit. They require expert analysis, and they really need to be looked at in a whole so that we can mitigate against unintended consequences. We're also looking at heat networks, understanding our multi-unit housing, understanding the usage. It's really essential that before we bring down that usage, we understand where it's spent and how easy can we reduce it. And then with that, we raise awareness. With raising awareness, we reduce energy, and that gives us a starting point from which we can then retrofit those buildings. We're also developing a heating strategy. So we've begun to interact with focus groups. We've sent out a survey, and we thank everyone for getting involved in that. And this helps us to understand the various properties, various priorities, and most importantly, as I said before, that it's not a single measure that fits all. It is really about understanding what properties require what energy efficient measures and which heating strategy is going to be best fitted to those properties. And ultimately bid for funding. As I said before, it is about creating solid bids and making sure that we're ready to deliver on what we say we are, which helps us to formulate a roadmap against the timeline to meet 2030. So watch this space. As part of our retrofit journey, we have engaged with our tenants via online surveys and an initial focus group. This will only increase as we progress over the next few years, especially, to get to 2025 and get all those properties up to EPC Band C. And then we hope to develop a dedicated page on our website for Q&As and updates on the subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prashanta. I hope that's helped people appreciate how retrofit is much more complicated than I think a lot of us realise. It's very easy when you're in your own home to do things, one thing at a time. It's very different when you're a big landlord with a lot of properties to deal with, and also wanting to avoid making major mistakes. It's really important that we work with our tenants to take them through this journey to having homes that, while they're cheaper to run and use much less energy, may be slightly different to what they're used to. So that was a good run through what we're doing on our own council buildings. And now I'm going to invite Stuart Mills, our Super Homes Project Officer, on to talk about making energy efficiency improvements to your home and the Super Homes programme. So welcome, Stuart.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yes, that's great. Thanks, Stuart.
So, hello, everybody. Thanks for inviting me along tonight. I work for a local charity called Winchester Action on the Climate Crisis, known by our acronym as WINAC. We are a volunteer-run charity. We've been taking action on the climate crisis in 2008. We do have some paid workers, like myself, where we can get funding for particular projects, then we employ people. So I'm employed as a project officer of the Winchester area super homes. I'm going to start just by explaining a couple of terms. It's really important to WINAC that we communicate about the climate crisis clearly to people. We don't want to confuse people by using words that they might not understand. And there's two terms that you will hear and have heard a lot of tonight. Maybe you know what they are, that's fine, but I'll go through them anyway. So the first is carbon emissions. So going right back to basics, carbon emissions. When you burn fossil fuels, when we burn fossil fuels, gas, coal or oil, one of the byproducts is carbon dioxide, which is the main greenhouse gas that's causing the climate crisis. So carbon emissions refers to that carbon dioxide. More carbon dioxide in the atmosphere means higher global temperatures and more extreme weather events. In fact, you might have seen a recent report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UN body, that said today's children will experience a nearly fourfold increase in extreme weather events if we have just 1.5 degrees centigrade of global warming by 2100. The other term is retrofit. So Prashanta did already cover that, but I just want to sort of stress that in this context, retrofit means adapting existing buildings, not new buildings, but existing buildings to reduce and change their energy use, which also reduces their carbon emissions. So there's about 55,000 homes in Winchester district, and heating those homes and the hot water that they use is responsible for about 20%. That's 1/5 of all the carbon emissions produced in Winchester district is produced by how we heat our homes in the hot water. And that's basically because we are still burning stuff to heat our homes in the hot water, mainly natural gas, but also heating oil and coal. And we've got to change how we heat our homes so that we stop burning fossil fuels and we use electricity instead, because electricity can be made without burning stuff. Now, on a side note, at the moment, as Charlotte mentioned this earlier in one of her slides, that about 40% of the UK's electricity is currently produced by gas-fired power stations. In other words, we still make nearly half of our electricity from burning stuff. But that is going to change, and change fairly soon. The government is aiming for the UK national electricity grid to be carbon-free by 2035. So from that point, and running up to that point, it will change slowly. All electricity will then be generated and carbon-free sources by a mix of solar, wind, tidal, hydro, and nuclear power. So the most efficient way of using electricity to heat a home is by using a heat pump, because it extracts heat from the air or the ground, and so it's 3 to 4 times more efficient than a gas or an oil boiler. We can also produce our own electricity without burning stuff by putting solar panels on the roofs of our homes. And most importantly, we can reduce the amount of energy that we use to heat our homes by making sure they lose less heat. So heat through the walls, the ceilings, the floors, and the windows. In other words, more insulation, more draft proofing, and better windows. So there's basically 3 main ways to reduce the carbon emissions of our homes: heat pumps, solar panels, and insulation. And the last 2, solar panels and insulation, will also immediately cut our energy bills. Heat pumps at the moment, despite being far more efficient than gas boilers, cost about the same to run as a gas boiler, simply because electricity is about 4 times the price per unit as gas. Again, that is likely to change as we approach 2035. It's extremely likely those prices will rebalance and electricity will become cheaper than that in comparison to gas. So it can be very hard to know exactly how you can install all those measures on your own property. And I saw in the chat somebody said, oh, county wall insulation creates damp and mold. And people have a lot of questions about what's the best way to go about it. So the sort of questions that we often get, like, what type of insulation does your property need? Every property is different. Again, as Prashant said, every property is different. How much electricity can you generate from solar panels on your roof? What size heat pump do you need? And how much is all of this likely to cost? How much money is it going to save you on your energy bills? What order should you do it in? Do you need to have more ventilation to your home? And if you ask a commercial installer all of those questions, can you trust their answers? Are they just trying to tell you something? Do they know what they're talking about? So at WINAC, at Winchester Action on the Climate Crisis, we have come up with a way which we think is the best way of helping homeowners retrofit their properties. We are providing people with detailed, tailored, independent advice on exactly what they can do to their property to reduce its carbon emissions and its energy bills. So our non-profit project, Winchester Area Super Homes, connects homeowners with trained, qualified professionals called retrofit coordinators. So a retrofit coordinator is trained to carry out a home energy survey and produce an individual report for that property called a whole house retrofit plan. This retrofit plan details all the measures that you could take to reduce your home's carbon emissions, with estimates of the likely costs, savings, and the carbon emission reductions. And that allows you to make a well-informed decision on exactly what you can do, instead of just having to rely on the advice of commercial installers. We also provide advice on grants, any available grants. We've got project subsidies for people on low and middle income, and we give people a list of local accredited installers. We also want to show other people what can be done by creating and sharing case studies and videos of homes across the district that have carried out this work. And to help make it all happen, we've also got project funding to pay for the training costs of 5 local people to become retrofit coordinators and the accreditation costs for 10 local installers so that basically more people can do the work, build the supply channels. With this project, we want to really kickstart home energy retrofit. We're going to show people exactly how it can be done. As part of the project, we are putting on a Green Homes Fair this Saturday, so here's a quick plug. St Peter's Church Hall on Drury Street. We'll have a working heat pump there, lots of schools information. It's on from 11 AM to 4 PM. If you'd like to find out more about this project, how you can get one of our whole house retrofit plans, just go to this address or simply Google Winchester Area Super Homes. Okay, that is all for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Again, we'll take questions when we've finished all the presentations. So we'll now have our final presentation from Catherine Shadwell, Partnerships Development Manager at Agility Eco, who's going to talk to us about retrofit funding available under the HUG and LAD funding streams. So over to you, Catherine.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen 1 second. Please tell me if this works okay.
Yes,
everyone see my
that's
screen?
working.
Wonderful. Okay, brilliant. It's always good to know what technology's on my side for these sorts of things. So yes, thank you everyone for listening today. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the Warmer Homes programme. So my name is Catherine and I work for Agility Eco. We are the delivery partner for the Warmer Homes programme that's running in the area. So to give you a bit of background onto the programme itself, I just thought it'd be quite useful to give you an idea of where the funding's come from. So the Warmer Homes programme is actually a consortium of councils which Winchester City Council are part of, and it basically some time ago now, last year, we put in a bid led by Portsmouth City Council to Bays's Sustainable Warmth Fund, and we were successful with this bid, and we got funding from 2 different funding streams. The first one is Local Authority Delivery, which is acronymed as LAD, and the Home Upgrade Grant, which is acronymed as HUG. So the LAD funding actually came about in July of 2020, where the Chancellor announced a £2 billion Green Homes Grant scheme to help upgrade homes across England. Under this, originally they had 2 streams in which this was being delivered. It was originally under firstly a voucher scheme, which no longer exists, but they also have the other stream, which is funding being allocated to local authorities through this local authority delivery scheme. So this is funding for on-gas homes. And then secondly, we have the HUG funding, which is funding that came about when the government last year published a sustainable warmth strategy. And within this, they had a £150 million home upgrade grant scheme. And this is funding for off-gas homes. So that's a little bit of a background as to where the funding came from. So just to give a bit more detail about the timeframes of the funding and what funding is actually available. I will also in a second go through eligibility for the programme and how to apply. But just to give you an idea, so the programme will run until the end of March 2023, so end of March next year. And in total across the consortium area, we've got 21 councils that are involved. We hope to support about 1,600 on-gas homes and 1,000 off-gas homes with this funding. So there's different amounts of funding available to a property based on whether or not they are on or off gas, and it's to do with these different funding streams that we have within the programme. So the LAD funding can provide funding of up to £10,000 per property, and the HUG funding can provide up to £25,000 per property. So like I said, dependent on whether or not you are on or off gas. Sometimes there's a little bit of a uncertainty around what constitutes an off gas property. So the way that BEIS, the government department, define it is that the property can't have a gas boiler or gas central heating system. However, they can actually be connected to the gas network. We do find properties that have, for example, they're connected to gas, but they have a gas cooker, but their heating might be electric or LPG or oil and like. So there is that allowance there. And then I just wanted to mention eligibility for the programme. So The programme is available for owner-occupiers and private rental tenants only. Unfortunately, we're not able to offer the programme to social tenants at this time. And then in terms of criteria, sorry if it looks complicated, I'll try and make it as easy as possible. It is hopefully quite straightforward. So the main thing is the property has to have a low EPC rating. So that's an EPC of E, F or G. We also do have limited funding available for EPC D rated properties as well. But BEIS, who are funding these two different funding streams, are wanting us to focus on the lowest rated properties, as they are the poorest performing properties in terms of energy efficiency. And then either one of these criteria can apply. So either having a total household annual income of £30,000 or less, and that's before housing costs / bills, or receiving a means tested benefit, which is one of the ones, so basically any of the benefits that I've listed below, or meeting the eligibility criteria that's specified in the local authority's eco flexible eligibility statement of intent. Sorry, it's quite a few words in that one. So if anyone's receiving any of those benefits that they're at the bottom of the slide, I won't go through them all, or they have an income of £30,000 or less, we would strongly encourage them to apply for the programme. So a little bit about the measures that are available. So there's funding available under the programme for the following measures. These are a mixture of both insulation and renewable heating measures. So we have funding available for solid wall insulation, so that can be external or internal. We tend to find that internal wall insulation works better for properties where there is a requirement for them not to change the exterior face. That could be because they are in a listed building or in a conservation area where they're not allowed to make lots of external changes to the property. So that's why we've got those two options there available. Also cavity wall insulation as well. And then the other types of insulation that we have available are underfloor insulation and loft insulation, and also room in roof insulation. The other insulation that we have available is for park homes as well. So we also have park home external wall insulation available under the programme. And then other measures, we have two different types of heating. So we've got air source heat pump funding available under the programme, and also funding available for high heat retention storage heaters. This is just for off-gas properties only. Normally, we would only recommend a high heat retention storage heater for a property that we're unable to fit an air source heat pump into. Typically, this can be, for example, flats, because or a flat above a shop, for example, where we're not able to install a heat pump because it has to be on ground level for a heat pump to be installed. And then the other funding available is for solar PV panels as well, which I know a few of my fellow presenters have already mentioned, and also heating controls as well. So there's a wide variety of measures that are available under the programme. And then lastly, almost there, is to about how to apply. So we have two methods of applying. So either residents can apply online, so that's our website there, which is warmerhomes.org.uk, or they can call us. So we've got a free phone number there which ends in 5737. So residents are either welcome to call us or apply online. The application form doesn't take too long. I'd say it takes about 5 minutes in total. And then once you've applied, we'll send a confirmation that we've received your application, and then we will contact you about the next steps that are involved. I also just wanted to quickly at the end put up a few of the more common FAQs or frequently asked questions that we get about the programme. These are some that normally do appear quite early on. And I know also we had a question in the chat about EPC ratings and how to find out what your EPC rating is. So we do have a lot of people ask us that they don't know their home's EPC rating or it doesn't have one. Typically, it may not have an EPC if you've lived in your home for over 10 years and you haven't recently sold it or bought it because you have to have an EPC available when you do that. So you can look online firstly. So the government has got a Epc Register, which I've included the link there. I know the slides are going to be available afterwards. So you can use that link to find your home's EPC rating. If you want to apply for the programme, but your EPC you don't have one or it's expired, so it's over 10 years old, then we can arrange for an EPC to be done as part of the programme, and we cover the cost for that as part of the programme as well. And then also we do get people asking, you know, what if you've got any questions about the application? Like I said, once you apply, we do contact you about the next steps. But we've also got a direct email address, which is retrofit@warmerhomes.org.uk, or you can call us on the free phone number as well. And I've also included in there a link to the FAQs. There's many more FAQs that you can find on the website as well. So yes, that is me. Thank you for listening, and I will check the chat. Now I have been able to see the chat, sorry, whilst I've been talking, but I will check it and hopefully be able to answer any questions that you might have. So thank you.
Thank you. That was a really good presentation, Catherine. I'm sure a lot of people found it useful. We do get very confused about all of these schemes that come forward at different times with different eligibility criteria. I do actually recommend using the Find the Energy Certificate tool, because it's really useful for discovering which of your neighbours has a much more fuel efficient house than you do and finding out what they've done to make it better. Right, well, we're doing really well on running to time, so we've got a considerable amount of time for questions. I did say I'd take first the questions that were sent in, and our first question was from Councillor Keith Daly from Upham Parish Council, who I believe is in the forum. I don't know, Keith, if you want to turn your camera on and we can allow you to speak. Right, well, I'll go through the question anyway. So Keith's question was that he'd been discussing the issue of the carbon footprint of Upham Parish Council. Here we go. Right, if you'd like to unmute yourself, Keith, would you like to ask your question? Oh, right, no sound. Okay, that's fine. We'll run through it. So Keith's a councillor at Upham Parish Council, and they've been discussing the carbon footprint of the village and was looking at the impact report for Upham demonstrating its carbon footprint, and was asking whether the analysis was based on the statistics for a rural village with a certain demographic, no mains gas, no mains drainage, little public transport, etc. Whereas it would be better if the analysis was based on actual performance of the village, where we can propose changes that might best be made with a cost-benefit analysis of recommended changes. So the basic questions were the carbon footprint marks broad brush, or did they have a scientific foundation appropriate to each area? And the second question was, will there be recommendations as to how cost effectively village residents can make improvements? Right, do we have a council officer who's available to answer this question? Right. Anna, are you dealing with it?
Yes, well, Steve also might back me up. These to give some context, last year Winchester City Council supported a joint project with the Centre for Sustainable Energy and led by WINAC, which produced a carbon impact report for all of our 41 parishes. I'm afraid that preceded me arriving, so I think I need to look in a bit of detail at exactly how, you know, the background to the data to those reports came. So, Keith, I would suggest that perhaps we could get back to you by email and take the discussion offline, which I think will probably help you, but will help us as well. Steve, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
Excuse me. Yeah, thanks, Anna. I was here at the time it was done, although it was somebody who works in my team who was hands-on managing and overseeing the project, so they were closer than me. I do know that the reports were produced based on data relating to the specific parishes in question. So there is a degree of science to it. It's not completely broad brush. However, I am aware that when we spoke to our colleagues from the Centre for Sustainable Energy, they pointed out that it's not an exact science. So you know, there's an element of the reports which are sort of indicative. But it is very much based on base data that relates specifically to the area. So they should be more than just a broad brush, very generalist approach to a parish like yours, Keith. But like Anna said, I think maybe what we can do is take it offline and look with the specifics at you to try and make sure that you guys get the best possible advice in terms of how you might take that forward, because that's really what the project was all about.
Right, yep. Thanks for putting in the question, Keith. Second question is from Councillor Tim Jackson from Littleton and Harestock Parish Council, who asks, on the matter of the Warmer Homes initiative where substantial grants are available, as a parish councillor, I'm keen to ensure that our most needy residents are steered towards this. Is there any help which Winchester City Council could give to parish councils to help us to target efforts to raise awareness and support applications of those likely to be in most need? Right, who would like to answer this? Anna?
And yeah, Catherine, I don't know if you've got any comments, you know, as to how other councils are approaching it, but certainly I know via our comms team, we're trying to push out the information both via parish councils, but also by, you know, all our normal communication routes, which include, you know, email lists, social media. And I know that they're really thinking about how we can get a bit more momentum behind this. But Catherine, what's your experience?
Yeah, so we do have things like marketing materials available. You know, we've got things like flyers and social media posts and things like that, which I can see your email address linked to the question, so I can always send them to you directly, and then you're welcome to use those to sort of help promote that message. Like Anna said, that we're working very closely with the council directly to promote to residents, but any additional help that we can get from the parishes to sort of further disseminate the programme message out there would be great.
Right, Steve?
I suppose I just wanted to add to that I think that's great, really just sort of building on that whole concept and the principles behind the We Can project. We're really keen to encourage our parish councils and other sort of community groups and organisations to sort of take ownership for it. It's great. It sounds like Councillor Jackson's really doing that via the question. So I think, you know, that really just builds on the We Can initiative, and I think we're really keen to work with parish councils, particularly those that are really keen to, you know, take that leadership role. So yeah, absolutely.
Right, thank you for that. The next question comes from Paul Hamilton, who I know has a number of other questions in the chat as well. So the first question was that many years ago, someone stated that 7,000 properties had been identified as being suitable for solar panels. So far, I know only one council property with solar panels, Matilda Place. Should this now receive some more urgency? The second part of the question was, I keep seeing lights on during the day in unoccupied premises, some owned by WCC, for example, garages at Winnell Flats. Why? I think I'd like to ask Prashanta if she'd like to say something about solar PV on council residential property. We have been doing a lot in terms of putting solar panels on our own buildings, such as the new leisure centre and the refuse depot. But Prashanta, do you want to say something about
I must
council
apologise
homes?
because it kind of probably was agreed prior to me coming on board, but it is really that what has been agreed that is that we would look at, as I said, fabric first, and the real background in that is that you're not going to get the efficiency and certainly the payback for the outlay, the financial outlay of a solar panel. If you don't deal with the fabric, you're just going to lose the energy out. Your PVs are going to be oversized because your energy consumption within that property is going to be too vast. So it is really a strategy to deal with the fabric, lift the fabric up, and then roll out renewables. Other than that, we're just putting, good money after bad, essentially.
Yeah. Separately, Paul also asked, how does he find his home's energy rating when he lives in a council flat? Are our energy ratings available on the government system?
They should be, yes. All energy ratings are available. You just have to put in your postcode, as I think Catherine Shadwell had already suggested.
Yeah. Right. Thank you for that. Right, so the final question that was actually written in was from Councillor Thompson on behalf of a resident who's registered disabled and lives in his own house. He has applied to have solar panels fitted to his roof under the Warmer Homes scheme and has also asked whether any grants are available to help further insulate the house. He mentioned the Green Homes Grant scheme, which he has heard about. Catherine, can you deal with this one?
Yeah, sorry, when you mentioned Warmer Homes, that's why I came back on. Yes, so without knowing the exact person that it is, if they've applied already for the Warmer Homes programme for solar panels, then they would have heard from us by now about progressing their application through for that. The Green Homes Grant is part of that funding that funds the programme. There was originally, I mentioned it briefly, but prior to, well, at the same time actually as the LAD funding which we use, there was also the voucher scheme that was available through the government, but that's no longer available, and I don't believe, as far as I know, is going to be returning anytime soon. So the primary funding is available through the LAD programme, and that we have under the Warm Homes programme name. So in terms of applying for that, firstly as well, when we install solar panels, we will also look at the house's insulation as well. BEIS are very much wanting us to do what they call a fabric first approach, which is probably a bit techie speak, sorry, but essentially they want us to look at insulating the property as much as possible. So whilst we will do the solar panels, we will also look at the installation of the property as well anyway, and look to see if we can get funding for that through the same programme as well. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Right, so presumably that should have been looked at when the initial Warmer Homes.
It gets looked at as part of the survey. We survey for the solar panels, and then we also have an installation provider or providers that can come and then also look at insulating the property at the same time.
Right, yeah. Well, we'll pass that back and see what can be done. Looking at the chat, we have a number of other questions. So we have a question from Kevin, no surname, about, are we going to discuss carbon reduction plans as per UK government PPN 0621? Now, as I understand it, PPN 0621 was referring to central government procurement, and I think it was for large contracts over £5 million. The carbon reduction plan was for contractors to demonstrate that they were working towards meeting the government target of 2050 for moving to zero carbon. Clearly, if the question was in the context of what the City Council's doing, we're working towards a target which is much closer to the present day than that 2050. Right. Okay. Kevin's put his hand up. Would you like to put your camera on, Kevin, and we can turn your mic on? Right. Hi. Can you explain the context of your question? Right. You'll need to unmute yourself.
I think it might be up to me to unmute, if you just bear
with. No, it's all right. I've enabled the mic already. Anna, I'm ahead of you there.
Okay, so I'm Parish Councillor in Bishop's Waltham, but I own a health, safety, environmental business. And what I'm finding is that a lot of the large companies that are complying with the carbon reduction plan as per PPN are also asking their suppliers to join the carbon reduction plan, even though they don't meet the criteria laid down by the government. Yeah. They're saying it's good practice and we want you to be part of it. So I'm just wondering if obviously the City Council have got some obviously big contracts, if you're intending to talk to your contractors about doing exactly the same as industry's doing, in particular in the cities.
We're certainly looking at how companies are approaching zero carbon in terms of our procurement practices. Anna, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
I've actually sit on a group with my counterparts in some of the other Hampshire councils, and we're looking at different ways in which you can approach this. A lot of what we procure are services. They obviously, the really big ones are park and ride, refuse collections and so on. We account for that in our current scope 3. But I know that some councils have tried specifying sort of in quite a lot of detail, the energy rating of equipment that they would like people, that people can buy, whereas others are taking a more broad brush. So it's definitely, we introduced a new sustainability procurement guidelines that we worked to as a council last year. So with that, for example, includes social value in our contracts. So I think it's definitely, we made progress last year with the new sustainable procurement strategy, and it's, we're still hoping to build on that. It's not perfect. And we're just looking at the moment to share best practice with other Hampshire councils and perhaps take that step together.
Okay, you mentioned obviously number 3, but number 1 and 2 are the main ones which are actually causing the problems around the world, because that's obviously mainly utilities. So perhaps that's something that we should be looking at as well.
Yeah, I mean, it falls within your scope 1 and 2 emissions, but it's our scope 3. If you like,
yeah.
Kevin.
Yeah.
Using
okay.
that.
No, just obviously the carbon reduction plans are actually, you have to break it down to scopes 1, 2 and 3, and then further break them down into obviously various things, including commuting, etc. Yeah.
So we
Okay.
did introduce commuting to our carbon footprint, I think 2 years ago for the first time. Yes, I mean, it is confusing because some of our energies we report, in fact, large amounts of the leisure centres, and that falls into scope 3 because they're contracted out services. But I think in terms of procurement, we're looking, you know, when the big contracts come up, like the park and ride, definitely to see, you know, how carbon can be reduced as part of that contract renewal.
Okay, thank
think
you very much.
It's important to say that we are trying to keep these things as simple as possible and not exclude small and medium enterprises from our contracts. We don't want them all going to the big boys just because they're better at doing the paperwork.
Okay, right, thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah. Right. So thank you. We've had a number of comments about condensation and mould, which is obviously an issue where houses are poorly heated or leaking heat. It's certainly something that we're aware of. I think I'm just trying to work out who might be best positioned to deal with comments around there. So we've had a number of questions. Prashanta, would you like to talk?
Yeah, sorry, I've just
talk about condensation?
Yeah, as I was saying in my presentation, that it is one of the major things that we're looking into as to how to understand our properties. And of course, many of them, you know, do suffer, as many of our properties in the private sector, with condensation and mold. And it's very much part of their process of monitoring and evaluating. So even within response maintenance, we are looking at trying to put in monitors for temperature and humidity to gauge what their property is doing. And when we come to retrofitting, we have that data already, or once we've retrofitted, to understand if it's performing, as I say, if it doesn't have condensation or high relative humidity, which leads to condensation and mold. So it is a major subject. We also tie that in with ventilation. So any property we look at for retrofitting past 2035 really hones in on the idea that you need to assess the ventilation. And in most cases, when retrofitting, ventilation won't be sufficient for that added insulation. So it's the upgrade in the insulation and the ventilation, and ensuring that if a property is well ventilated, you then have reduced condensation and mold. And it's, as I say, assessing and feeding back. So the assessing and the monitoring will be fed back to the tenant and obviously to ourselves, where we can understand how that property is performing.
Right, thank you very much, Prashanta. And obviously all that's relevant to homes generally, not just to council homes. Right, I've had a question. Well, it's not so much a question. David Robertson has asked if he can have a brief word about the work that the council's doing with businesses. David, do you want to turn your camera on?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for 2 minutes. So I'm David from Meerkat Associates, and we have a contract with Winchester City Council to look after and help the small business community in the Winchester district. So to answer or to help with Kevin's point about tendering, we also want SMEs, small businesses, medium-sized businesses in Winchester to be able to access tenders. So nationally, the large companies are all they have to report or create carbon reduction plans and such like. But we have a free service funded by the council to help small and medium-sized businesses do that. It's called Zero. I've put the link in the chat, and also over and above that as well. So we have a 7-point plan that we work through with the business to look at carbon reduction opportunities. The business decides what they want to do, what they can afford to do with the cost of living crisis as well. And we put a plan together with them. We'll measure their carbon footprint today. We'll measure their carbon footprint in 12 months' time. And ideally, we can make them or help them to become carbon neutral. Moving forward, we'll help and guide them to become net zero. But that's outside of this programme. Over and above all the free support and advice that we've got for Winchester businesses, there's also grants available, business grants. So there are business efficiency grants or energy efficiency grants, for example. So if businesses are buying equipment that's going to be more efficient, if they're installing new boilers or a different type of boiler, and as long as they're insulating their properties, as long as they're removing carbon and that can be measured, then there's potential 40% grant available to businesses. So over and above that, if it's a business in the Winchester district that also can help other businesses remove carbon, the grant can also help with marketing and such like. So all of our services are free. It's available now. Please go to the web link, and we're championing. We sit over and above the grants. So I worked on lots of public sector grants in the past, business grants. So I know all the shortcuts and all the things we need to do, and some of the traps that people fall in. And we're going to make it as easy as possible for Winchester businesses to access as much funding for removing carbon as we can. Thanks very much.
No, that's great to hear. Thanks very much for that, David. Yeah, obviously businesses are a big part of our district's carbon footprint, and it's important that the council does help them with their zero carbon journey as well. I think a lot of the other questions which have been asked have been dealt with in the chat. If anybody has anything urgent that they'd like to ask, then please, if you put your hand up now, then I'll be able to see it. Right, so Phil Gagg from Winchester Action on Climate Change. Phil, would you like a quick word? If you'd like to put your camera on and unmute your mic, you can speak.
I'm trying to unmute. Oh, thank you. I was responding to the suggestion, which is a bit of an old trope now, that you shouldn't install solar panels unless you insulate your house. I think it's really important both to install solar panels or find other ways of generating electricity in a zero carbon way. It is also incredibly important to insulate your home. But there is an old trope tied in with the old government policy that it's not worth installing solar panels before you've insulated your home. I think at a Winchester level, we have an interest in as many people as possible installing solar panels, and we should encourage them all to install solar panels. And it shouldn't be dependent on insulating homes, because if you have a badly insulated home, you'll be using a lot of energy, and at least some solar panels will reduce the energy, the carbon emissions of Winchester District. I think we should do both, but we've got to remove this, you've got to do one before the other mentality that we heard earlier. And I hope that we do. We've got to maximise both.
Right, I don't know if Prashanta, would you like to respond as to why the general advice is insulation first?
Well, I think it's important to note that I think it's about 70% of households or slightly less within the UK are powered by gas. And if you put PVs, how much of that are you actually using to reduce your gas bill, which is in the vast majority the major fuel consumption. The other thing is that the guidance that we need to follow as a public funded entity is via Past 2035, which has been a structure that pushes either whole house deep retrofit, where you look at the house entirely and go, okay, needs to be insulated, we need to put in better services, we need to put new renewables. But unfortunately, the funding doesn't exist, the time doesn't exist to do that. And we are doing that in certain properties that demand that. But if we need to look in the long term and at a faster pace, we really have to reduce how much energy people consume prior to investing. And in terms of just spend, the price of insulation versus the price of a PV is vastly different. And so the council, you know, we need to spend where we're going to get the best wins, the quick wins, and insulation is the quick wins on a far more properties than rolling out PVs, which is far more expensive. So it is looking at the payback period. It is looking at how we get those energy reductions. And of course, carbon emissions is part of this, but we can't be rolling out PVs with a limited amount of funding and given the legislation we have to follow.
I think where it's publicly funded, you're right, but we shouldn't discourage people from installing solar panels just because they've got high gas bills. I would agree with you entirely.
Of course,
no, just remove the prior to in the sentence, because
no, I agree with you.
I think it's a false opposition for Winchester City Council area, Winchester District. We've got to find ways of producing solar energy in Winchester and encouraging everyone to put solar panels on their roofs, whatever their gas bill, is really important.
I agree with you. If you've got the means, go for it. And but as a fellow architect with private clients, they often ask what the payback is, and once you tell them, they're not interested. So I totally agree with you. If you have the means, go for it.
And the payback time will change as fuel gets more expensive. So we've got to change our mindset.
Yeah, I think we fully get the point. Right, I do. So thanks for that, Phil. Right, I did have Councillor McLean indicating he'd like to speak. Councillor McLean, I've enabled your mic and camera.
You have. Yeah. I've heard really wonderful presentations this evening about trying to sort the problems out. But there is a cost element to this that we're being told it has to be funded by someone. Most of the solar panels currently come out of China. Companies like Yingli and also Panasonic, which are linked to China. So there are supply issues there. Having recently driven up through France, I noticed a huge number of wind farms. We tried to build a wind farm at Mitchell Dever, I think it was recently. That was thrown out because people didn't want it built near their houses. So until we get a change of thinking about how we're going to go green, there's a lot of talk tonight. Someone's paying for that talk. But we started talking about this when I first came into council, when I was working in the solar industry, probably 10 years ago. And we've not gone forward. So, you know, I'm not blaming your lot or my lot, but we haven't done anything. So where do we go from here to get stuff done quickly? Apart from building large solar farms, we now have 3 of them in Bishop's Waltham, a 4th coming shortly. How do we get wind power? Sorry. Yeah. What do we do? Can someone chuck something into this that's not stuff I've heard for the last 10 years?
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor McLean. Of course, this evening was very much around what we can do in our own homes.
But we can't all afford it.
What councils?
We can't all afford it, and the council's going to pay.
Yeah, this evening has been about basically our own homes, our council homes, and what people can do in their own homes, as well as around the energy crisis at the moment, which is driving people towards making those energy efficiency moves sooner rather than later. We are running over time now, so I would like to take the opportunity to thank all of our speakers this evening. I think we've had some excellent presentations. I understand Anna is going to be sending the presentations out to all attendees this evening. So obviously they'll have the opportunity to have a closer look and a think about what's been said. And certainly if you've got any further inquiries, then just get in touch with us at the City Council. So thank you all for attending this evening. We've had a really good attendance and some really good questions. So I'll just wish you all a good evening and enjoy the rest of it. So thank you very much, everyone.